Hello, and welcome back to our 35th live stream, Pyramids versus Tetrahedrons. Now, for those of you who are not math geeks out there, 35 is a tetrahedral number, which means you can sort of stack the multiples and of numbers like 1, 3, 9, etc. Into this sort of tetrahedron type shape, which is a three-sided pyramid. Now, of course, me being an Egyptologist, I happen to think that pyramids are cooler than tetrahedrons. But, I'm biased. So anyway, this is our live stream where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. And like always, super chats have priority. And if you aren't going to be giving me a super chat, but still want to ask a question, and we do take some non-super chat questions, we try to take as many as we can. We ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question so I know that it's directed to me. I ask that you post the question only once because I scan through the live stream looking for questions. So if I have many questions being repeated, that's just a bullhorn, and I'm just going to ignore it because I want to make sure I'm getting a clarity of signal for the questions. And then finally, I would ask that if you give me a question about something in language or a verse in the Bible, that you either tell me what you think that word means or the Bible verse, so I can look it up and get some context for the question. So with that said, let's get into our questions. We are going to start tonight with 2 non-super chats because we always like to take non-super chats. We want to make sure we squeeze some of them in. So we're going to start with this one from Chow Yi. And the question is, Dr. Falk, ever been to St. Catherine's Monastery? And the answer is no, I haven't. I have never actually been there. The reason why is because when I actually started doing Egyptology, it happened to be during the Arab Spring. At least when I was doing my doctoral work on this. So, my first trip to Egypt was actually in 2013, a year after the Arab Spring occurred in Egypt. Well, the downside of this is that the Arab Spring left a lot of sort of terrorist groups wandering around the more desolate parts of Egypt. So right now, Sinai is a hot zone. It's a hot zone of terrorist activity. So it's not a safe place to go. So I've never been to St. Catherine's just because it's just one of those places that is very remote, very dangerous. You're likely to get yourself killed going there. The other issue with St. Catherine's too is it is a monastery. It is a working monastery. They don't actually want a lot of visitors. Monks are kind of strange that way. They just don't want outsiders coming in and trouncing through their premises. So they're not exactly the most friendly or receptive to visitors. To visit St. Catherine's and actually be able to visit the monastery, you need permission from the abbot, and there's procedures and paperwork and all that and stuff you have to go through to actually do it. It is actually a big hassle to go there, even if when times were good. Now you can just show up, walk up the mountain, but you're not going to get inside the monastery. So it's not the easiest place to visit. It's just not the easiest place to visit. So no, I've never been in there. So I'd like to see it someday, but I have not been in there. So let's take the second non-super chat question here from the same subscriber, Chow Yi. Is Genesis 41:45 that mentions Joseph's wife was the daughter of the priest of On? Is On a deity or is it something else? It's something else. The quick answer is it's the name of a city. And the city is the Egyptian Ianu, which is the Egyptian name for Heliopolis. It's essentially the city of the cult of the sun god Re, also Atum Re. So it's a little, today we would locate this in the sort of the northeastern suburb of Cairo. So that's where it's located. But he was actually a priest at Heliopolis. So that's sort of what the text here is getting at, is that this is the sort of basically the Heritep, the high priest of the city of Ianu. So it's a place name. On here is a place name, and it's the Hebraization of the city of Heliopolis. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Great question. Because the text isn't exactly clear of whether this is a deity or a name of a place. And it happens to be the name of a place. So, great question. All right. Let's get into our super chats. And we've got a lot of them today. Very much, I want to thank everybody who did a super chat today. It's nice to come into a live stream like this, especially given that we had a lot of technical difficulties today, and we might still get some technical difficulties. But we have some technical difficulties with the camera, so it's nice to come in with the super chats ready to go. So we'll start off here with the first. Okay, and it comes from Austin McMahon for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Does Ezekiel 29:12-15 correspond to historical developments, or is this text apocryphal in nature? Masterful response to Kip Davis, by the way. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the super chat. Now, it does actually correspond to it, but we have to understand, too, that the text here is sort of vague. I'm just going to read the text, because it's always helpful to read the text. So let's go to Ezekiel Chapter 29, and I did write an article on this particular passage for the Lexham Geographical Commentary. And the verses you cited are 12-15. And it says, verse 12, "So I shall make the land of Egypt a desolation in the midst of desolated lands, and her cities in the midst of cities that are laid waste, will be desolate for 40 years. I shall scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them among the lands. For thus says the Lord God, at the end of 40 years I shall gather the Egyptians from the peoples among whom they were scattered, and I shall turn the fortunes of Egypt and make them return to the land of Pathros, to the land of their origin, and there they will be a lowly kingdom. It will be the lowest of kingdoms, and it will never again lift itself up above the nations, and I shall make them so small that they will not rule over the nations." Okay. So, we got lots of things going on in this little passage here, but I'm just going to point out a few details. First, in verse 12, it talks about 40 years, desolate for 40 years, and scatter the Egyptians among the nations. Now, that did happen. During, say, the Assyrian conquest under Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, many Egyptians were deported, just like the Israelites in the northern kingdom of Israel. After the Assyrians' conquest of that kingdom, they were deported and scattered amongst the Assyrians. So the same thing happened to the Egyptians under Assyrian rule. 40 years is just an indeterminate period of time. It doesn't actually correspond to years. So it's that idiom again. It's that idiomatic expression of, say, 40 years being a long, indeterminate span of time. So after the fall of the Assyrians, many Egyptians did return back home. So that's a truism. That's something that actually happened. So many of them did come back to Egypt. As far as verse 14, "And I shall turn the fortunes of Egypt and shall make them return to the land of Pathros." Now, Pathros is actually it's a borrowed Egyptian term. It comes from the Egyptian Pataresi, and it's basically the upper kingdom, the upper Egypt. That's what it means. So this is that area, say, south of Memphis, all the way down to roughly Aswan. So it's a real regional land. It's well known, and that is actually the origin of, say, the Egyptian kingdom. So that's very interesting in that respect too, because it does get its origins as a kingdom with the southern or Upper Egypt conquering northern or Lower Egypt. So that's a very interesting historical detail right there. And verse 15, and it will be the lowest of kingdoms, and it will never again lift itself above the other nations. Now, again, that's also true. The fact is that, say, after the Assyrians first, and then the Persians really gave the Egyptians a beatdown. Now, the Persians were absolutely brutal. The Persians just ransacked and destroyed every vestige of Egyptian pride that ever existed. I mean, they just totally beat them down. And after that, they really never were a expansive hegemony ever again. There was a small blip during, say, the Ptolemaic period, where, say, the Ptolemaic rulers, which are actually culturally Greek, when they had sort of expanded once again into the Levant, but it was very brief, and it wasn't a strong hegemony as it had been during its earlier days. So it never was the same kingdom it started out. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and thank you for the great question. Okay, our next super chat is a very, very generous super chat from Brick Creation. Okay. Why do women need atonement after having periods before entering the tabernacle, even after 70 days? Is it because she needs to cover up, atone for her past uncleanness before entering the tabernacle of a god of the past, present, and future? Leviticus 15:30. Now, let's just read Leviticus 15:1. And I do very much appreciate that super chat. That's a very, very generous. Very much appreciated. 15. And the text says, "Thus you shall keep the sons of Israel separated from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is among them." Okay. What we have here is actually not an atonement. What we have here is a procedure for dealing with ritual uncleanness. Now, the problem with ritual uncleanness is when it comes not so much interpersonal relations, but really more against, say, accidentally, say, bringing defilement into the tabernacle or later on the temple. And an Israelite religion took matters of clean and unclean very seriously. Now, we kind of have to understand that the distinction here between clean and unclean is much more along the lines of, say, ordinary and or normal and abnormal. So it's almost easier and better to think of it in terms of normal and abnormal, say, versus clean and unclean. So abnormal events are things that just don't happen in your everyday occurrence. And a woman's period doesn't actually happen in its everyday occurrence. It happens at a specific time a month. Now, this is not just these rules don't just apply to women; they apply to men too. And there's an aspect of this where, say, male will have, say, a night emission, and he's unclean for the rest of until the following evening. So, in both cases, both are expected to ritually bathe. Now, in a culture that doesn't bathe often, this is actually a really good thing. They're expected to bathe and wait for a period of time so it doesn't happen again. To make sure that what you have here is a result of you're basically seeing that at the end of the period that, well, if, say, the woman continues to bleed, well, she remains ritually unclean because she's handling bodily fluids. So, this is one of those things that's taken very, very seriously in Israelite culture, because uncleanness is communicable. Let's say, for example, I touch a corpse. And then I go and touch someone else. Well, it's not only me who's unclean, and it's not only the corpse that's unclean, I've also contaminated that other person. I've passed on the ritual uncleanness. So the solution to this would be to make the proper rituals to become ritually clean again. Bathing, sometimes a small offering to the temple, sometimes a priestly blessing. Sometimes you may even need to be examined by the priest to make sure that the uncleanness is gone. So there are examples of this throughout the Old Testament, where you have to go through these procedures to make sure you are ritually clean. And as I say, it's not just women, and it's not about making atonement. This is not about sin. This is not about sin. And atonement is usually for sin. Atonement is usually for sin. Atonement is basically a covering of over sin. This is not about sin. This is about clean and unclean. So the rules are different here. And normally, in the case of, say, this time of the month, or even a man's uncleanness, this is usually resolved mostly by ritually bathing. And it makes good sense, too. I mean, think of it this way. These people are bathing more than most of the people, in the world. So at a time when people didn't bathe, you got people bathing here on a regular basis. That's a good thing. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, and thank you very much for that great super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Next super chat is also from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did the James ossuary come from the tomb of Talpiot? People say that it has the same soil. Well, that's going to always be a big question. Big question. It's possible. It's possible. The problem with the James ossuary is it's unprovenanced. It just showed up on the antiquities market with no idea where exactly it came from. So this is always going to be, where did it come from is always going to be an issue. Now, some people say it has the same dirt. A lot of the dirt in that area looks very similar. The whole Jerusalem area has that similar sort of limestone foundation. So, you're going to get that iron-rich, calcium-rich rock, which, by the way, is great for growing crops in, but, it kind of looks all the same. So it's hard to make a real determination here as to where exactly the James ossuary came from. So we don't know. But again, this is the problem with antiquities that come off the antiquities market. You're not sure if they're genuine, and you're not sure where they came from. Because you don't know where they came from, you can never sure that they're genuine. So it's a big problem, and as long as the illegal trade in antiquities continues, it's going to continue to be a problem. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our fourth super chat today is again from Brick Creation. Thank you very much for $10. I enjoy your channel. It's a rare find. Do you recommend other channels that deal with history, archaeology, and the Bible? I feel like it's hard to find channels like yours. Well, it is hard to find channels like mine. I mean, we fit a specific niche. You can find channels that are really good on history. You can find channels that are really good on archaeology. You can find channels that are even good on the Bible, like Mike Winger's. Pretty good channel on the Bible. You're not going to find one that's good in all three. It's a trifecta. It's the triple threat, Sing, dance, and act. It's really difficult to find channels that can adeptly handle all three areas. So it is difficult. Part of the reason I can do it is because I have a very, very diverse background. So for me, I can, with virtuosity, jump between them with fair ease. So, some of that you can blame to the fact that I keep changing my major too in college. But, however, I can't recommend that one that does the trifecta, but there are good channels out there that do all three in their specific capacities. So, um, anyway, I hope that answers your question. I do appreciate your support. Your super chats really help keep us going, and I very much appreciate the questions too. It is a good question. I just don't have one. Can't recommend that one that does all three well. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, now we're up to Twidget here and select connect. Now we had a little technical difficulties before going to the show here. So I just have to make sure that we caught all those other super chats that sort of snuck in between. And okay, it looks like we did. So we're good. Okay, so the next super chat is from M Sharif 124 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, do you take the story of Joseph to be historical? Yes. How do you understand this being in the belly of the whale? He was dead. Essentially. He wasn't alive in the whale. Right, that's one of the things I think we kind of need to understand is that, well, one of the reasons why, I should say, one of the reasons why that I take the story of Jonah to be historical is that we do find Jonah also referenced in the Book of Kings. So Jonah is not the only attestation. The Book of Jonah is not the only attestation of Jonah. He's also mentioned as a prophet in the Book of Kings. So, we've got extra, two sources for Jonah. One from the Book of Jonah, one from Kings. So that's why I take the story to be historical. Now, how do I understand him being in the belly of the whale? Basically, he got thrown over, eaten by a whale, died in the whale, and then got spit back up on the shore. And he was looking like a corpse, because he was a corpse. God resurrected him there for the purpose that he had sent him to. So I think that's how I understand it. I don't think there's any question that he was alive inside the whale. I know we see those little stupid Sunday school things where he's got a little table and chair and a candle going on inside the stomach of a whale. Now, that sort of stupidity that doesn't help anybody here. No, I think he was good and dead inside the whale, and he spent 3 days in the whale. And I think this is what Jesus meant when he said, the death and resurrection of the Son of Man will be like Jonah in the whale. He's dead. He's dead as a doornail. And then he comes out of the grave alive. So I really take seriously the death of Jonah in that case. It also solves that, well, how did he stay alive in the whale? Well, he wasn't alive in the whale. He was dead. And he was dead as a corpse. And had still suffered some of the effects of being in a corpse. The third question here, is the conversion of the 120,000 people in Nineveh historically plausible? Sure, why not? You see a whale beach itself, throw up a corpse that just stands up and comes to life. Oh yeah, you're gonna believe. Now we have to understand that this is before the imperial period of the Neo-Assyrians. Okay, so is it plausible? Yeah, I mean, it's plausible, but it didn't last either. And it didn't really need to be recorded because it was such a sort of a historical blip. One generation with 120,000 people, coming to, repent. Okay, yeah, is it plausibly? Sure. Are there times when conversions this big go unrecorded? Yeah, sure there are. Like, for example, we know that a lot of people in Japan were converted during the Jesuits, but, no one recorded the numbers, but it was a very large number. So yeah, conversions that size are historically possible, or plausible. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. The next one from M Sharif 124 for $10. You've stated that biblical cosmology does not affect your view of inerrancy because the language of biblical cosmology is analogical. Correct. Can you explain more what this means, perhaps with some examples? Oh, sure. Oh, and by the way, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Analogical language is used all through the ancient Near East. And it's actually still used today. We still use it when we talk about God because you can really only explain God, the infinite nature of God's attributes, in analogical terms. And that means you're using an analogy, something from our everyday existence that helps us understand things. And analogical language in the ancient Near East, very common. Very, very common. We see this, for example, in, say, the false doors that we find in Egyptian tombs. These tombs, a lot of Egyptian tombs are decorated with this door that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't have a passage behind it. It's nothing but a decorative wall, a decorative door on a wall. So what does that do? Well, that was used to kind of communicate, basically, that going from this life to the afterlife was kind of the same thing as walking from one room to another through a door. So it's using what we use in everyday life and elevating it into the drama of the divine. We see this, for example, in the book of Genesis when, during the flood, when it says the windows of heaven opened up and the rain came down. Well, there's not real windows up there. It's an analogy. It's an analogical piece of language that's trying to communicate something that people don't really quite understand. So they're saying, I don't really understand it, but I'm going to try to describe it in these terms. So now, biblical cosmology is also being described in analogical terms they understood. So to try to explain things they didn't quite understand. So anyway, that's why it doesn't affect the view of inerrancy, because there's no expectation that an analogy is you have to make an analogy walk on all fours. You don't press any analogy, to its extreme limits, because it's like something, but it's not the same as something. And that's really, really important when we talk about analogical language, is that, or metaphors, or even similes. These are literary devices that are used to make something understandable, but they are not exactly the same as the thing itself. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped and cleared things up. I really appreciate the question. Okay, another one from M. Sharif for $10. Thank you very much for this super chat. Did the ancient Israelites believe that God was somehow localized in the Ark of the Covenant and later in the temple? Yes, they did. Localism was the common, like, for example, in the Late Bronze Age, localism was the preeminent view of divinity. It was believed that gods could be in only one place at one time. It didn't matter where you were in the ancient Near East during the Bronze Age. This was true across the board. It's true from Egypt and even parts of Africa, all the way to practically India. So this was just the preeminent view of divinity back then. And then you say, how do you square this with God's transcendence as expressed in 1 Kings 8:7? Okay. Basically, the idea of transcendence is very interesting, because one of the things that we find with the Ark of the Covenant is it's using a visual language here that leverages on localism and then flips it on its head. It's very, very clever. It's really, really clever, because you've now got a box, a piece of ritual processional furniture, where there should be an idol between the wings of the cherubim. There isn't. That's really interesting, because it changes all sorts of different dynamics here. it basically takes the responsibility of caring for gods out of human hands. So it takes that localism and respects the idea of localism, but then sort of changes it. The real breakthrough then, though, comes in the Ten Commandments, where you have God creating the world in 6 days and then resting from it. So the idea of transcendence is already in the Ten Commandments. But early on, they're respecting all the sort of social, cultural, religious norms of its period. But in doing so, in respecting those social, cultural, religious norms, it does something, a twist on things, to just take it and flip it on its head. So it goes from, say, a localist, immanent God, and transforms that to a God that's always on the throne, always in control, always in charge, never needs to be fed, never be put to bed, doesn't need an idol, he doesn't need a separate body, because he's all powerful. And then adds that, oh, and when he created the world, he rested from it. You know, completely different idea of who God is through this. So that's how it's reconciled. It's taking human frailty and condescending to those beliefs in order to gradually change those beliefs. So anyway, I hope that answered your questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. MJ for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. First time here? Hope so. Cause glad you're here with us, because I don't recognize the name. Okay. Question is, why did Moses grind up the golden calf and have the people drink it? Thank you. Because he was mad. He was angry. He was very, very angry. There wasn't an expectation that this would happen. We get from the passage involved, and that, you know, Moses goes up onto onto Mount Sinai to receive the law, and as he's receiving the law, the people downstairs are sinning, and they're sinning wildly, and you know, God's anger burns against the people. God's anger burns against the people. And Moses says, no, don't destroy the people. Have mercy on them. Have mercy on them. Whatever they're doing, it can't be all that bad. Have mercy on them. And God relents. You know, God says, okay, you know, I'm not going to do anything. So what does Moses do? He goes down there and he sees how really bad it is. And he flips. He flips and he kills a bunch of people. And then he grinds up the golden calf and makes them drink it. Which, by the way, was probably just essentially, you know, grinding it down into, you know, pounding the idol into gold foil, mixing it with some sand and forcing them to drink that. So that's probably what they were doing with the actual grinding of the idol there. But this is an example of Moses' anger and Moses taking it out on the people. And Moses' anger is going to eventually get him in trouble. It's eventually going to prevent him. Because one of the things is, you know, in this particular case, this is Moses exacting his judgment on Israel, not God exacting God's judgment. So I think that's really, really important to keep in mind here as we, you know, look at this passage, because it's a lot here that's not necessarily from God himself. This is the outcropping of Moses' anger. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Very much appreciate the super chat, and welcome to our live stream. It's great that you're here. Okay. Another very generous super chat from M Sharif 124 for $50. Thank you very much for the super chat. Why do the concepts of post-mortem judgment, heaven, and hell only begin to appear in the intertestamental period after Persian and Hellenistic influences? Why did God keep the Israelites in the dark about this for most of the Old Testament period? Well, I think some of this is, by that point, Canaanite concepts were no longer in the picture. Now, one of the misinterpretations that they have, that many people often have about concepts of death and the afterlife and all of that, was as it refers to the Torah. Some theologians will state, I think incorrectly, that the Israelites had no concept of death and the afterlife prior to the Hellenistic period, the Persian and the Babylonian period. I don't think this is true. It would be exceptionally strange if the Israelites were the only people in the ancient Near East not to have a concept of the afterlife. It would be exceptionally strange. But we do get hints of it. We do get hints of the afterlife, particularly in the Psalms. That do seem to be pre-Hellenistic, pre-Persian. But we also have to keep in mind that they're glimpses. They're glimpses. And I think part of the reason is because we do see, for example, in, say, the Canaanite, that there is a concept of the afterlife even in Canaanite literature. There's certainly a concept of the afterlife in Egyptian. I mean, wow. The Egyptians went overboard for the afterlife. You could call King Tut's tomb a little excessive if they didn't believe in an afterlife, So, we do find that they do have a concept of the afterlife. The Semitic Asiatic burials we find at Avaris. Well, they're buried with grave goods. These are the proto-Israelites. And they're burying their dead with grave goods for the afterlife. If they didn't believe in an afterlife, why are they burying grave goods? Why don't you just plop the body in the ground and be done with it? You only need grave goods if there's the possibility of an afterlife. So, really early Israelite culture definitely believed in an afterlife. Why isn't it part of, say, Torah? And I think it's because that Torah is meant to guide you in how to live in this life, so that the afterlife isn't a problem. You don't have to worry about the afterlife if you're following Torah. You're worshiping Yahweh. You're following the book, as it were, or the books. We have to remember the Bible's many books. So I think that's the reason why it's not an issue, is because if you've done what's right, you've got blessings and posterity and relationship with God. And if you've got relationship with God in this life, you're going to have a relationship with God in the next life. So anyway, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. And it is a good question. Thank you very much for the question, too. Okay. MJ for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And I do see your question below, and I will grab that. Which is, what were the A&E practices surrounding blood? In particular, why is drinking blood prohibited and sex during menses? Okay. This sort of harks back to the question previously. Now, blood is ritually unclean. We're not sure why. It's true in Egyptian ritual culture. It's also true in Israelite ritual culture. In the case of the Egyptians, most temples had a bakery and a slaughterhouse for the preparation of meat for temple worship. Now, the slaughterhouse was usually located outside of the temple precinct, so that you bring your animals for offering. The meat itself was ritually clean. The blood wasn't. So they would slaughter the animals outside the temple precinct in the slaughterhouse, take care of all that nasty blood, salted the meat, and now the meat was ritually clean. We also see that this is a problem in, say, Israelite culture too, where, you know, there is some view that blood in some cases, and actually not all animal blood, to be honest, but particularly blood was not unclean when used for, say, the blood atonement. That was not considered ritually unclean. So when the lamb was slaughtered for Yom Kippur, you know, the blood was actually brought into the temple, brought into the Holy of Holies, and sprinkled on the Ark of the Covenant. So it was not unclean in that case. So it really depended on the context. It depended on the kind of animal involved. Human blood is unclean. And really only if it's done in an unnatural situation, like say a murder, or say during menses and sex. So in those cases, it's unclean, but it isn't always unclean. You know, if you cut yourself by accident, you're not unclean. You're not unclean. Wounded, but you're not unclean. So it really depends. The blood of a murderer is unclean because it's now a dead person, and it's a dead person's blood. So in that case, it's unclean. Which is why you had Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, or as the Jews say, Epiphanes, madman, slaughter the priests on the altar. He did that as an act of defilement. So, you know, it all depends on the circumstances. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Very much appreciate the super chat, and great question too. Okay, M. Sharif again, 124 for Vitals. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wow, you're on a roll here. What is the significance of the miracle of Moses' hand becoming leprous as white as snow? Okay. To spread fear, essentially. Leprosy was people were really afraid. I mean, you think people are afraid of COVID today? And they are. People back in ancient times were afraid of leprosy. Not everyone wore shoes. And if you wore sandals, you could easily pick up leprosy from, you know, working the soil. Leprosy is a disease that you pick up from the ground. It's part of, say, the natural soil flora fauna of the ancient Near East. So people wouldn't wear shoes. People worked the ground with their bare hands, and they would contract leprosy from the ground. And once that happened, it was a death sentence. It was a death sentence. And the more the people with leprosy worked a field, the chance of other workers in that field contracting leprosy was very, very high, because it survived in ground soil very well. So that was one of those sort of, you know, things that just struck terror in the hearts of people. So if you could take your ordinary hand, stick it in your shirt, pull out a leprous hand, that freaked people out. People were automatically afraid of you. Then when you stuck your hand back in, pulled out a completely healed hand, now they were even more afraid. Because not only did you have the power to make something leprous, you had the power to take it away. Very scary stuff. You know, this is one of the reasons why, and this really resonates in Egyptian mindset too, because it was believed that divine beings that could heal you also had the power to inflict disease. The goddess Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of both healing and of illness. Basically, when you did a prayer to Sekhmet, you were asking the goddess to heal you of the disease she inflicted you with in the first place. So the two went hand in glove, healing and disease. So somebody with the power to inflict plagues also had the power to take it away. So the significance here is that Moses is foreshadowing the 10 plagues. This was a act to show the leaders and the people of Israel that this is what's coming. The ability to strike plague and to take it away. So this was basically to say, hey, this is going to happen. Don't panic. And this is going to happen to the Egyptians. Not with leprosy per se, but with other things. And they were doing it with something that they understood very well. So anyway, that's what's going on here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And another one from M. Sharif 124 for $5. Thank you again. What are the different views on how the vulture Aleph hieroglyph was produced? Okay. It's typically thought that it's a glottal stop, but it is one of those glyphs that sort of changed over time. During, say, the late period, it takes on a different pronunciation, sort of an LR pronunciation. But I think for, say, if you're taking if you're taking Middle Egyptian yourself, treat it kind of like a glottal stop. Basically a blank character that holds a vowel. So a voiceless consonant, and it is a consonant. Every Egyptologist agrees it's a consonant. That it's a consonant that sort of takes on another vowel to give it sound. So, but later on, again, it does change, and it's one of those sort of. It's probably one of the more controversial of the pronunciations of the Egyptian alphabet, because you do have different views on this. Some people think it was always voiced. I kind of doubt it. And the reason I doubt it is because it is used in very similar situations when, say, Hebrew words or Semitic words are transliterated into Egyptian. They tend to use the vulture for the Hebrew Aleph. So that's why there is there's some sort of parody of phoneme there, and phoneme is a sound. There does seem to be some similarity there that they would choose that as the preferred character of transliteration of the Hebrew Aleph. So, but it does also seem to take on a different pronunciation. It's not the, I should say, no, that LR sounding it takes later on is a little different. One of the things is it becomes more of a silent R or silent L. And we see, for example, in late Egyptian, our terminal R's in or the mouth glyph in Egyptian words tends to drop off and get replaced by the vulture. So, we see this, like, for example, kaper comes kapa. So we see that sort of thing happening in Egyptian. So even though it does sort of shift to that LR, it's a really, really soft one. It's not a hard R like the mouth character. So I hope that answers your question. Very much appreciate the super chat. M. Sharif 124 again for $5. Thank you very much. Does the 10th plague have to pertain to Pharaoh's literal firstborn, or could it have applied to whoever was his oldest living son heir at the time? It definitely was whoever was the oldest living heir or son at the time. Definitely. Firstborn is just, say, a idiom for heir apparent. That's basically what it is. It's a legal term. It's used as a legal term in both Egyptian and Mesopotamian law codes. So, this is really not that contested. The idea that it's the literal firstborn is almost even sort of ridiculous, and that's because infant mortality was just incredibly high in Egypt. Most children did not survive to age 6. If you lived to age 6, you probably would end up living to age 60. Your chances of living from to 60 once you reach age 6 are much, much higher than living from childbirth to age 6. So once you passed age 6, your chances of living a full life were pretty good. Your chances of dying before age 6 were really high. So it really doesn't even make a lot of sense that this is the ordinal firstborn, because it just, didn't have that much impact, because the expectations that a firstborn, ordinally would die is pretty high anyway. But it's definitely talking about heir apparent. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. I hope that answered your question. Okay, Theologia for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on the ages of the patriarchs in Genesis 1:11? Are these referring to clan lifespans? If so, how do you know? Okay. I think it does refer to clan lifespans. Very, very much so. And the reason why is because we do see clans being named in this way in other passages. For example, we do see this in the book of First Chronicles. So we do see that. Where, for example, the son of Joseph, Ephraim, goes to, when they come back to the Holy Land, because Ephraim's born in Egypt. He lives in Egypt, and he dies in Egypt. But in First Chronicles, it says, his sons are killed in Canaan, and, Ephraim mourns over that. Well, that's not Ephraim personally. That's his clan chief, who is mourning over. So, we do see this usage in other places in ancient texts. But moreover, we also see in, for example, the Genesis 1 through Genesis, those ages of the patriarchs. We do see also that the lifespan does not necessarily refer to the son being mentioned. We see this, for example, in the very last verse of each of those genealogies in Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, where, like, for example, in Genesis 11, the very last one is talking about Terah, and he's 70 years old when he gives birth to Abraham, Terah, and Haran. Well, Terah wasn't 70 when he gave birth to Abraham. He was 135. So what's going on there is, what you see is that there's an honorific transposition going on for the specific child, and that child being the most important person in that clan, the clan leader. So even though Terah is older when he gives birth to Abram is given the honorific position as being the most important person in the clan. So he's giving the honorific position and being assigned that age. So we know those ages are not connected to the specific members of the clan. Now, this is not to say that the people of the clan were not real and those events didn't happen. What we are saying is that the most notable person is always given distinction within the clan. Always. Because they're the important people. They're the ones you want to remember, Just because you fostered a clan doesn't mean you get to lead it, or it'll even be named after you. If, say, your son after you becomes, better known, more famous, and more important. This is just how clan politics work. And this is how clans remember their ancestors, is through these clan associations. Not so much of the individual. It's not an individualistic society. It's not like American society. We in America are an individualistic society. Rugged, independent individualism is sort of the American motto. But it isn't in the ancient Near East. Everything revolves around the clans. So, and clan politics is so important. If you understand clan politics and the way clans work, you understand a lot more of the Bible than, say, your average pew warmer. And if you understand that alone, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of reading your Bible. So I would encourage people to become well versed in that. And there's a real excellent book on this. I can't remember the name of it. I did a book review on it, but I'll post it up in the chat afterwards. So, but it's an excellent book. It's a good primer for reading the biblical text with a sort of a clan perspective in mind. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here. I'm glad you made it. Who is the most underrated ancient Egyptian king, and who is the most overrated? Sorry, I couldn't think of right now. The other way, I'm terrified of clowns. There's actually a phobia named after clowns. I don't know if Kitty wants to look it up, Kiara wants to look it up and post it on there, but there is actually a phobia of clowns. So you're not alone in being afraid of clowns, and that clown was particularly terrifying. Who is the most underrated ancient Egyptian king, and who's the most overrated? Okay. Wow. Who's the most underrated? Gee, well, that's a really tough question to answer, because most Egyptian kings try to self-aggrandize. So, underrated. I think some of the more underrated kings of Egypt were probably my guess. Okay, here's my guess. Okay, I've got an answer to that. I think the most underrated Egyptian king was Amenhotep I. Amenhotep I did a lot of things that go under the radar. He started the mortuary at Valley of the Kings. Okay. He began the Theban sort of, even though, because one of the things about Amenhotep I was he was actually, when he inherited, say, the kingdom from Akhmosa I. Akhmosa I was the great conquering king of Dynasty 18. But his successor, Amenhotep I, was much more of a Solomon-like character. He established a dynasty of peace. And the first kings of Dynasty 18 were basically trying to redress wounds, fix Egyptian society, make things work again. And much of the work of Amenhotep I was sort of went under the radar. He was rebuilding channels and hydrology to get fields producing again. He was trying to bring stability to the kingdom. He was trying to keep insurgent elements in check. So he did a lot of good for Egypt that sort of just went totally under the radar. We wouldn't know much of anything about the kings of Egypt today if it wasn't for Amenhotep I starting the necropolis at Valley of the Kings. He took the very, very radical decision of not building a pyramid for himself and instead using a rock-cut tomb. That was really radical. All the kings, if you were a king before that, you made this big, big pyramid that people came and did offer food and libation offerings to. He didn't do that. And he started the village at Deir el-Medina. But without that village, we wouldn't have the ostraca from Deir el-Medina that tells us so much about the Egyptian economy, about Egyptian life of, say, the craftsman class. Our understanding would be completely impoverished without all that. So absolutely, Amenhotep I, I think, is the most underrated king of Egypt. Now, who's the most overrated? This is going to surprise you. It's actually Ramses II. Ramses II. While he was a great builder, it was all facade. It was all smoke and mirrors. He had an army, he had a big army, but he lost it. Not just once, but twice. He lost most of his army, first of all, at the Battle of Kadesh. And then he loses the rest of his chariots at the Sea of Reeds. his conquests were not so good. In fact, he sort of set up, like for example, he has on the western frontier and the Libyan frontier, he had a garrison town at El Alamein to sort of rattle the saber against the Libyans, but he didn't actually take a lot of action against the Libyans. We don't know why, but he just didn't. This sort of set up the problem that would later happen to his successor Merneptah, where the Libyans invade Egypt and basically start eating out of the Egyptian larder for 3 months before Merneptah can even respond. So Egypt is under invasion for 3 whole months, while sort of Merneptah tries to get his act back together because of the mess Ramses II left. So I think Ramses II is, as much as I like Ramses II, he is the most overrated. So anyway, that's the answer to the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I empathize with you on the clowns. All right, Kenneth Vaughn for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Are there any clues in biblical genealogies that can tell us whether we are seeing individuals and their clans or families? Now, we already sort of touched on that on the last super chat, or 2 super chats ago, so I'm not going to repeat that a whole lot. But we do see this in the honorific transposition. We do see this in the treatment of, say, clan identities in First Chronicles. We do see this, for example, even in the extended lifespans. It's very clear that this is, and we do see this in, say, clan culture, where a clan is named after its progenitor. So we do see this in cultural situations. We see this in the context. We do see this in the Bible itself, indirectly. But it is there. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Andrew Goulet, I hope that I pronounced that correct, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. When Joshua spoke with Rahab of Jericho, what language did they speak? Okay. They spoke a dialect of Western Semitic. Now, the thing is, with Western Semitic, the various dialects are close enough that one can actually get by with, just some simple adjustments to your language. For example, a native speaker, say a Hebrew speaker of the late Bronze Age, could also probably converse with somebody in Moabite, because the language is very, very similar. I mean, basically, you have, say, mimation at the end of Hebrew words, where in Moabite you'd have nunation. Basically, words end with an noon instead of a meme. M or N versus an M. So all Semitic dialects are very, very similar. They are very, very similar. So you could easily communicate with somebody back then, because the Semitic language are so similar. So that's probably what's happening here, that we have a similarity of dialect, that, basically the people of Joshua are and frankly too, by that point they had been wandering the wilderness for 40 years, where they had come in contact with other Semitic groups. So even their language is going to, over that 40-year period, is going to start changing. It's going to be less that Western Amoritic Semitic language that they were speaking in Avaris, and it's going to change to that more sort of desert dialect of, say, the nomadic tribal groups in the Sinai. Because they are trading with people in the Sinai. They're not alone out there. They're out there trading, pasturing the sheep, etc. So, that's going to be part of the equation too, is who do they have contact with as far as Semitic groups in the Sinai. And there's a lot of groups out there in Sinai. So, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Theologia for 499. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there a destruction layer at Jericho and Hatzor that match well with biblical accounts? Yes. Hatzor, we have very clean stratigraphy. We have a early bronze destruction layer, which is way too early, and then we have a late bronze destruction layer that dates to around 1210 BC. 1210, 1220, roughly in there. Very clean, very precise destruction layer. It's a perfect match with the Joshua conquest. Now, the situation at Jericho is different. We do have that 1550 BC destruction layer, not a good match. But then again, too, the walls there are not a good match because they're a Middle Bronze fortification. And what's clear from the biblical account is that the walls were a casemate design because Rahab is living inside between the walls. So it's very, very clear from the text that she's living in a casemate wall. Well, casemate walls are late bronze and later. We do find a late bronze wall at Jericho. Now, the dating of that destruction still remains controversial. And it's going to come down to how do we date Garstang's late bronze destruction layer. And, his destruction layer is on the other side of the tell from the late bronze walls that, say, Lorenzo Nigro found. So, Nigro has already excluded a late bronze 2A destruction layer. He didn't find any late bronze 2A. That only leaves late bronze 2B. And late bronze 2B would date in that, say, 1220 range. So if you put sort of the pieces together, you can sort of figure out that that destruction layer that was discovered by Garstang is probably the same destruction that ended up destroying the mud brick casement walls there. So I do think that's a good match with what we find at Hatzor. It's the only thing that comes close. So I think that's a good match, and I think that's worth. I hope we get more data from Jericho, because we do find that there is a late bronze culture of some kind there. We find scarabs from Amenhotep III there, late bronze burials. So yes, there's some evidence there, and frankly, it struck me very, very odd that there would be a late bronze cemetery and no late bronze city. And Lorenzo Nigro did find evidence of site leveling there. So we do have an explanation of why we don't find more. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Very much appreciate the super chat. Andrew Goulet for $5. Who do you identify as King Ahasuerus of Esther? Well, one of the Artaxerxes, because Ahasuerus comes from the name Artaxerxes. Now, I don't know which one, because I haven't looked into this. I don't actually do much with Esther. So, and frankly, it's a little bit out of my specialty too, being that it's a Persian period king. So I don't do much in the Persian period. So, and especially not that area of, say, the Persian Empire. So, I don't have a proper identification for that. But that's sort of the etymology of this. Is Ahasuerus comes from the Assyrian Ahasuerus, which is in Greek, I believe that's Artaxerxes. So anyway, that's about all I know on this moment. So I'm sorry I don't have more for you here, but that's sort of the limits of what I know. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you, your friend. If one wanted a master's of subtype of Old Testament history studies in hopes of doing Christian ministry writing, what area of study would you recommend, if any? Well, what interests you? It really will depend. It will really depend on a lot of things here. It will depend upon what area of Old Testament or history you want to study, because there's a lot of them. I mean, I decided to take when I did my master's work, I mean, I ended up doing 3 master's degrees. I did one in divinity, and that provided an excellent foundation for doing later work because it gave me Greek, Hebrew, gave me some historical method, which was fantastic because I did a lot of church history. It gave me a lot of theology. It gave me a lot of it was a very multidisciplinary degree, so it was really an excellent foundation for doing future work. I then did I did a master's degree in biblical archaeology and ancient Near Eastern languages. That gave me more languages and more history and more archaeology. And then I did my 3rd master's degree in Egyptology. So, it's really going to depend on what interests you. And you kind of have to sort of explore this on your own. I mean, you might find you go into this and you find, well, I'm not that interested in history, but, I love, say, philology, studying texts. Or, maybe you like archaeology more. Maybe you like digging in the dirt. And if you do, I hope you do publish. It always drives me cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs when archaeologists dig and never publish. Oh, well, okay, yeah, I'll tell a story. Story time! um, when I was doing my master's degree, I was just sort of finishing up my divinity program, and I was looking at doing a 2nd master's degree at that point in, say, church history. And I'd been to a few academic conferences, and I went to this little mini conference for church history. Because at the time I was very much considering becoming a patristic scholar. I still am very interested in patristics. But I was really, really interested in the church fathers. So I went to this little mini conference on church history. And the guys were reading their papers deadpan. And it was like, I was bored silly for 3 hours. Later, I talked to the advisor and asked him, hey, is this normal for church history conferences? He goes, oh yeah, it's very normal. You have limited time. You've got like 20 minutes. You've got to read your paper and just do it with clarity and oh yeah. And he was really upset that I even asked. It's like, yeah, he was on edge that I asked him even, is this normal? And he's going, no. And at that point I thought, oh my gosh, I cannot do this the rest of my natural life. So at that point, that was the sort of the deciding moment for me to say, okay, I don't want to do history anymore. I want to do archaeology because it's more interesting. And the papers are more interesting. And the lectures are more interesting. That was really what sort of decided it for me. So even though at that point I had invested a lot of academic credits in church history, I went on and I did my 2nd master's in archaeology just because I couldn't stand the conferences. So, you really have to sort of decide what floats your boat, what is your passion, and you have to take enough sort of classes and courses to sort of figure out what's interesting. What do you love to read? What sort of books do you love to read? Because you're going to be reading the rest of your natural life if you do this. So it's really, really important to be really, really interested in reading. And in fact, the one regret I have is, with my current job situation, is I don't have more time to read. I would love to devote several hours a day just to read. I just don't have that time, and I wish I did. It would make life easier. It would make my ministry more effective. There's a lot of things that would be a lot better if I had more time to read. So anyway, I hope that gives you some good advice. Very much appreciate the super chat, and I'm glad you could join us tonight. Okay, Cam Britt, $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your thoughts on Satan in the Old Testament? Is he the same as Satan in the New Testament, or could they be different like Heiser suggests. Thanks. I haven't looked at Heiser's view here on Satan. It's a job description. He's right about that. Satan means the adversary, the accuser. So it's a legal term. You know, it's sort of he's acting as sort of like God's prosecutor. So I don't know if it's exactly a different person though, a being. I have some doubts about that, but you know he might be right. I'd have to look at his view on this to really discover more, and I don't know Heiser's view well enough to say one way or the other. And really, I haven't done much work in say studying demonology either to figure out if the identity of the Satan of the Old Testament is the same as the Satan of the New Testament. So it's possible they're the same, possible they're different. I don't know. I'd have to look into this more to figure it out. I just haven't had a chance to look at it that closely. Now, with that said, I also think there's a possibility too that Satan and Lucifer might be different as well. For example, Lucifer, the fallen one, leads all the angels into rebellion. Might be a different character than the Satan of the Old Testament too. Completely possible. They might even be ontologically different beings. You know, one being a high angel, the other being some sort of other created being. Right? Maybe perhaps from the divine council. So that's always possible here. But again, I haven't looked at this in enough detail to really make a judgment one way or the other. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's an interesting question. It's worth exploring. This is a question definitely worth exploring further. I just haven't done that work yet. So very much appreciate the super chat, and it's a great question, and I wish I had more to give you on this. So thank you very much. All right, Cheese One. Thank you. Good to see you here. I'm so glad you made it. It's exciting to have you here tonight. Okay. Hi, Dr. Falk. Could you please share any funny, spooky, moving, weird, cool stories from your times visiting temples and tombs in Egypt that you haven't before? Ah. All right. I got one. It's a little gross, but it is somewhat humorous. My very first trip to Egypt. My very first. I was doing proof texting, not proof texting. Proofing my my PhD manuscript for submission. I was a PhD candidate. I had not yet taken my viva. But they basically, you get all these published reliefs. Basically, people do drawings, and they publish them. But if you're a good researcher, what you do is you go to Egypt and you compare those diagrams with what's actually on the walls to make sure that what's on the wall matches the aspect in your dissertation. So you're basically verifying your sources. So I had taken a trip to Egypt to verify my sources for my PhD, which was a good thing because I did find mistakes in the publishing. But I was at one temple, the Ramesseum, and it's a great temple, beautiful temple. This is the Mortuary temple of Ramses. Beautiful, gorgeous temple, beautiful reliefs, interestingly fascinating reliefs. And I was in the astronomical room, basically where there's 8 bark reliefs, and of course my dissertation being ritual processional furniture. Like I was in my glory here. I love bark reliefs. And it was a warm day in March. And I was in the astronomical room. I was seated on the base of a pillar doing a drawing of one of the reliefs, hand sketch. And this woman and her followers, this was some woman running a New Age cult of some kind. She was walking, she walked into the astronomical room, and she goes, can you just feel the power here? can you feel the energy here? And she said, she told her followers, take off your shoes and just put your feet against the stones and feel the power and energy. Can you feel the energy? And I said, can you feel the leprosy? And I said, ladies, keep your shoes on. This is still a problem in this country. You don't want to have to go to the doctor complaining about leprosy. So that's a story I never told on this channel. So that's my cool, spooky, funny, moving story from an actual temple in Egypt. So, and I haven't told it on this channel before. So there you go. There's your story. And thank you for that super chat for 20 Australian. I really appreciate it. It does go a long ways to helping our channel. Okay. Another super chat from Andrew Goulet for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Other than your disagreements on the date of the Exodus, is there any part of ABR's research that you do agree with? I have a lot of problems with ABR's research. Oh boy. It's hard for me to find areas of agreement with him. Okay, here's one thing I do agree with him. I agree with him that there was an Exodus. I agree with him there. That's probably the limit of my agreement with them. My problem with ABR goes well beyond just the Exodus. It goes into Joseph. They really mistake Joseph. They take him out of Avaris and stick him down in Lahoun because it's closer to their dating. They read some text literally, other text figuratively, which they shouldn't do. And it's not so much that they're reading them figuratively, it's that they're inconsistent about what they make the claim that they're reading every text literally when they really aren't. I have some deep problems with their archaeological work. Part of the reason I have such deep problems with their archaeological work is because they are they're changing the data to fit their presuppositions. I think that's really, really dangerous for any researcher to do. As a scholar and a researcher, you want to the whole purpose of the scholarly research exercise is to ask questions, get the data, and answer the questions from the data. Not to start with your conclusion, fix the data to match your suppositions. I have some real problems with how they do archaeology. Because they do this, they twist the data. So I think what they do is very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous. And it does open up the Bible and Christian scholars to ridiculous criticisms. You know, criticisms that should not ever have, ever be an issue. Just because of their strange antics. And they've doubled down on this position to the degree that they almost can't walk it back. So I think they do a lot of damage. I really do. But I do agree with him. There was an Exodus. I disagree with him on just about every other point. I mean, it's a hard thing to get 100% of everything wrong. Just like it's hard to get 100% of everything right. So, they're not going to get everything wrong. But they do get a lot wrong. And my issues with them is some of their underhanded, dirty tactics, too. I have a lot of issues with how they sort of treat their opposition. Having been given the whole ABR treatment myself, I've seen sort of the shenanigans that they pull. And it's not just limited to the academic field. It also involves, tinkering with people's job prospects, using threats of boycotting funding to exclude certain views out of seminaries. They they're a dirty trick squad. I've got some real issues with not just how they come to their conclusions, but what they do once they have their conclusions. And that's all I'm going to say on this. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Cross for $2 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Who do you think the historical Melchizedek was? Okay. Great question. Interesting question. Melchizedek was the king of Salem. Now we find this actually in the mention of Salem is actually in the it is the city that it's the Jebusite city. He was a Jebusite. Melchizedek was a Jebusite, and he's king over the city of Salem, which is later becomes Jerusalem. Now, the word Jerusalem is found in the local dialect. We find it actually in the Amarna tablets. It's in the Amarna letters. And it goes by the name Urushalem. Okay? City of Salam. And Salam was the name of a god. It's the name of a god. Before it becomes known as peace, it's the name of a god. And likewise, Melchizedek is also a theophoric name. And it comes from the god Zadok. Zadok is king. So we have some idea of who he is. That he had some at least a history of worshiping other gods. That the city had history of worshiping other gods. But Melchizedek is both a king and a priest. Now, unfortunately, I wish we had more evidence from the city, from either the Amarna letters or say some other inscriptions that gives us more insight into what's happening in Urushalem prior to the biblical account, because that would tell us a lot more. But we do know that it was a city, it was established, it remained established throughout the Amarna period. So if it's in there during the Amarna period, it was probably also there during the time of the patriarchs. So I think that as pretty much the best evidence we have for Melchizedek actually comes from the biblical texts. That he was a king and a priest. He was both a king and a priest of Elyon. And that's also actually our earliest attestation of Elyon too. That if we take, say, Genesis as being a late Iron Age document, possibly even early, or sorry, not late Iron, late Bronze Age document, early Iron Age document, then it's also our earliest attestation of Elyon too, because he's a priest of Elyon, priest of the Most High. So, he does seem to have this sort of connection with the divine, to such an extent that Abraham was willing to give a tenth of all he owned to Melchizedek. Basically, Abraham is submitting here to a righteous king, a king that does good in the eyes of his of God. So we don't know much about Melchizedek, but we often know a lot more than people grant as well. So we do know some things about him. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Very much appreciate the super chat. Great question. And I think it's one that should be better answered by when it's asked. So thank you very much. Okay. M. Sharif again for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Wow, you've been so generous to us tonight. Very much appreciate it. Follow up. I still find it a little difficult to understand why the Torah and prophets contain so many dire warnings about God's punishment in this world, but not of the far more serious punishment in the afterlife. Thank you. Okay. Well, it's a corrective. It's essentially a corrective. If God warns you to get things right in this life. I mean, you can't correct once you're dead. That's it. You can't make any more corrections. You've made your choices. You've paid your money and take your chances after that. So it's sort of a way of correcting people. It's almost more the difference here between punishment and training, training in righteousness. What's it called when you correct a child? Not reprimand. There's a word I'm sort of missing at the moment. Like raising up a child to go in the correct way. You're not punishing the child. The purpose is not to punish the child. It's to chastise the child, to correct them, so that they do the right thing, so that they can avoid punishment. Okay? Like, for example, it's parenting. It's a kind of parenting. Like, for example, you know, if you might spank a child so that and I don't recommend corporal punishment. I'm not recommending that. So YouTube, don't get on my case for this. It's like correcting a child so that he doesn't go to prison later on. So he does what's right, stays on the right side of the law, and doesn't go to jail where he faces real punishment. Okay? So there's a lot of dire warnings in God's word so that people follow the correct path in this life so they can avoid real criminal punishment in the next. I hope that makes sense. If you put the emphasis on this life to get things right, you don't have to put the emphasis on the punishment in the next life. It's a preemptive way of working. You fix the problem here in this life, and then it's not a problem in the afterlife. So I think that's why the Torah and the prophets contain so many dire warnings about punishment in this world. Because if you only heeded those warnings, the warnings in the next life aren't an issue. You know, this is why the commands don't, like the commandments, you know, are almost always about this life. You know, where it says, you know, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. You know, that's a command for this life. But if you follow that, next life is not so much a problem. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do not steal. Do not commit adultery. Keep the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. Do not covet. Do not commit murder. These are all commandments that apply to this life. You shall have no other gods. Well, of course, that one refers to this life and not the next life. Because you'll have only one God in the next life, regardless of whether you're in punishment or if you're in bliss. So if you take care of this life, the next life sort of sorts itself out. So you don't need a lot of chastisement on the more serious punishment in the afterlife if you've got this life in order. And that's all about what Torah is about. Torah is not just a book of law. It is that. But it is also a way of life. You know, one of the things that you kind of hear sometimes, and you hear this more in, say, Messianic Judaism circles than you do, say, in more, say, Christian or Protestant church circles. But what, say, Messianic Jews will often say is that the New Testament is about living Torah. About living Torah. The idea is not that you're necessarily following all the commandments of the Torah. So it's not like the Hebrew roots movement, the slightest. It's all about you are keeping the spirit of the law. Spirit of the law and its intent through the following of Jesus Christ. It's living Torah. You are living the Torah inside of you, even if, everything else around you is going to heck in a handbasket. And if you've got living Torah and you're living the Torah in your life, with both New and Old Testament canon, it doesn't matter about the afterlife because that's all sorted. That's all sorted. Because you're a living disciple then of Jesus Christ in the Torah. So that's the distinction here. This is why, for example, say Jesus talks more about, say, hell than he talks about heaven. And he's talking to this about people who are living the letter of the law, but not the spirit. So they're not actually living Torah. They're doing the law as sort of this perfunctory, drudgery function. But it's not inside their hearts. They're not living out the fullness of Torah. They're only just sort of living a fraction of it and doing it in utter disobedience. So I hope that brings a little more perspective. So, but what we do find it in the law and the prophets. Now, again, we do find, say, more of, say, warnings about the afterlife, in, say, times when you get more cosmopolitan exposure. Like for example, during, say, the before the Babylonian exile, the Israelites lived in a theocracy. They lived in a theocracy. Law was, the Torah was part of their everyday life. You didn't need as many warnings about the afterlife. After the Babylonian exile, or during the Babylonian exile, now they're living in cosmopolitan, country. Even the state of Canaan was a province of Babylon. So you had Babylonian morality, you had Babylonian rulership, you had Babylonian laws and Babylonian religions. And now you have to introduce, without that structure of a theocracy in your daily life, now you need discussions about heaven and hell to say, okay, here's the long-term consequences of, say, disobedience. So it becomes a necessary function at that point. And in the highly cosmopolitan, say, New Testament period, which is even more cosmopolitan, because during the New Testament, you've got not just, say, the influences of, say, Hellenistic Greeks. You also had Romans. You had this Roman Empire that was just this sort of freeway of various, an Epicurean smorgasbord of religion. So then it becomes even more so that there has to be that sort of focus on, say, what are the eternal consequences. So anyway, I hope that further explains it. I hope it's a little more clear now. It's just more of a matter of, say, perspective of what the culture was at the time and what the needs are at the time. So that's why the needs of, say, one period of history is different than the needs of another period. So anyway, thank you very much for that extra super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that made things clearer. Okay. Christopher Larson gives a $10 super chat. No question. Thank you very much for your super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Very much appreciate the support that you super chatters give to us. It does help us keep things going. It is just, and it's such an important part of helping us do this and do this well. Very much appreciate every super chatter who donates generously to the channel to help us make men's. So thank you very much appreciate it. Andrew Goulet, again, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. According to a paper on Heiser's website, Egyptians thought it was significant to live 10 or 120 years. What is the attestation for this? Okay, yes, absolutely. Not so much 120 years, but 110, yes. 110 was the magic number of a sage. And we find, for example, the sage Jedi in Papyrus Westcar lives 110 years. So we do find this number on, say, some biographies. but also on texts of, say, semi-mythological texts that, talk about these famous, lector priests with excellent fingers. It's my favorite euphemism, favorite idiom of Egyptian is a scribe of excellent fingers, meaning he's very skillful at writing and with words and wordplay. These priests these priests and sages were said to have lived 110, and that's somehow the sort of the age that a great man lived to. So that's the importance there. Now, 120 years, you don't find that so much in Egyptian. And that's actually something that's unique to Moses. And reason is because it's 10 more than 110. So he's living 1 decade more. And the idea of that is that, well, Joseph lived 110 years because he is wise and knowledgeable and skillful. Great skill. And wisdom, and the Hebrew word for wisdom, hakmah, means not just wise, but skillful. A guy with a lot of skills is said to be wise. So Joseph, being a wise man, was said to have lived 110 years. And this has perfect parity with Egyptian myth, as it were, of these scribes. But Moses, being a more important figure, had to live a decade longer. Now, did both men actually live that age? I doubt it. Honestly, I doubt it. But I do think there's that we have to be cognizant that what's being done here is sort of symbolic of what's trying to be conveyed here is idea of, say, indeterminate time again, but also a symbolic number to show their status within the culture. So that's the attestation for that, and I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. John Fabeck for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I think this is the first time I've seen you on here. Anyway, welcome to the live stream. I hope you're enjoying it. Is there an Egyptian context to Abraham's covenant in Genesis 15, especially verse 17? I'm going to take a brief look at that because I do not have the Bible tattooed behind my eyelids. I could get that done easier. Genesis 15, verse 17. All right. It says, and it came about that when the sun had set and that it was very dark, behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed through the pieces. Okay, this is talking about the suzerain treaty. Now, we don't find this so much in Egyptian culture. We do find this in Mesopotamian culture. Now, at a suzerain treaty, what generally happens, to set the context here, is a king conquers a city. And at that point, the city's conquered, it's defeated. There's no, they're done. They're done. But now there has to be a peace treaty struck between the king, the suzerain, and the city. And there's a process and a drafting that comes up for these treaties. And part of that process of doing a treaty is the people bring animal sacrifices to consecrate the treaty. What happens is the animals are sacrificed, and then they're cut in half. One half goes on one side of a trail, the other half goes on the other side. And what happens is the people are supposed to walk between the pieces, basically as a symbol of, if you break the treaty, you become like these animals and split in half. Okay, and this is to the people's recognition that they're entering into a blood treaty with the suzerain. So that's the context. What makes Genesis 15:17 so unusual is that Abraham doesn't walk through the pieces. It's God walking through the pieces. The suzerain in this case is walking between the pieces and consuming them. This is a one-sided treaty. Very strange, very unusual. Very unusual. And the suzerain treaties aren't normally done this way. It's usually the peasants that have to walk between the pieces. God is saying to Abraham here, I am making a treaty with you, and it's all on me to keep this treaty. Abraham does not have to fulfill anything here. It's very, very unusual, and it's unlike most treaties. It's unlike the Sinai covenant. It's unlike every other, say, covenant and treaty that you find in the ancient Near East. But it is yet unmistakably a suzerain treaty. It's unmistakably a suzerain treaty. And yet it is completely different at the same time. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Very unusual. So there isn't an Egyptian context here, but there is an ancient Near Eastern context here. Definitely. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Wow. Now, there's another $10 super chat here from Christopher Larson. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. No question, but if you have a question, we'll be happy to answer it. But we do appreciate super chats just to support the channel. We value every super chat, and we are grateful for our supporters who really go out of their way, to help us out, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Thank you, Samuel, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you or would you be willing to play D&D? Oh. I think you can guess the answer to that. I love D&D. It's been a long time though since I've played. Would I be willing to play D&D? Certainly. The problem is I don't have the time. I wish I did. I mean, I haven't had the time to game in the longest time. People don't understand how long those last two videos that we did. First the Aliens versus and the Lost Ark, and then our review of Kip. How long those took? Both those videos took an incredible long length of time. And right now we're sort of still playing catch up to do our next piece of content, supposedly for Monday. We got nothing planned for it so far. We've got an idea of what we want to do, but we just, time has not been on my side. Time has definitely been not on my side. And at this point, my work is expecting more out of me because we're short-staffed. So, yeah, I am in a time crunch that I have not experienced in a very, very long time. So, while I would love to have the time to just do a good D&D campaign, especially if everyone does their character sheets ahead of time. That was always the one thing that really annoyed me about D&D campaigns. Just annoyed me about D&D campaigns. Was everyone would come and they wouldn't have their character sheets done. And we're sitting around for 30 minutes to an hour rolling dice to get their character sheets done. Yeah, if you do a campaign, have 5 character sheets done ahead of time. So if someone dies, you're not having to re-roll a new one. A little planning so you can just get into it would be nice. Which ones? Oh, Oh, that was Paranoia. Yeah, there was another role-playing game called Paranoia where you start with 5 clones. Because they're all going to die. It's only a matter of how you're going to die. But yeah, I have nothing opposed to playing D&D. I actually love the game. Love the game. Love the books. Love the books. But I haven't had a chance to play in a very long time, and I don't play anymore just because of time restrictions. But not against it. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Sean Horton, good to see you here tonight. $20 super chat. Thank you very much. Besides wooden literalism, blatantly projecting one's political views thousands of years into the past, and psychoanalyzing the authors, what are other interesting hermeneutics out there? Ooh. There's a lot of them, actually. You do see today, I'll say, a lot of like feminist hermeneutics, where modern feminism is sort of grafted on the Bible. You see LGBTQ hermeneutics, particularly in the relationship between David and Saul's son, who's escaping me at the Jonathan. You know, you do see that a lot. You do see some, you know, some odd hermeneutics. For example, on a lot of thematic hermeneutics are very strange. Like, for example, sometimes thematic goals will be superimposed over a, say, like for example, I heard about this PhD that was once being written. I don't think it ever got written. The guy was but he wanted to read a kingship hermeneutic over Torah, and yeah, I think that was a disaster waiting to happen. And I think it's because it's not in there. You don't find a lot of kingship in Torah, not enough to make a PhD dissertation. So you do find these sort of interesting oddities that do come up from time to time, in that are hermeneutical readings that are interesting but also deeply flawed. So and I mean, you also get say postmodern readings too. There's a lot of postmodern readings, you know, where they treat every text as if it were subjective. Gnostic hermeneutics. Gosh, I mean, you can do crazy stuff with Gnostic hermeneutics. Like, you can take a and the Gnostic hermeneutic is one of say not an analogy, symbolic, was it? Oregon's readings. I'm having a lot of mind slips tonight. Allegorical. Yeah, an allegorical hermeneutic, where you're basically taking words in the text and redefining them, spiritualizing them. And while there are allegories in the Bible, and allegorical readings in the Bible should be read allegorically, not every reading is allegorical. But the allegorical method takes every reading of the Bible and allegorizes it. One of the most interesting of these, and I might read it someday, is Augustine's reading of the sower and the seed. And he takes an Oregon-style allegorical reading and applies it to the parable of the sower and the seed. Now, while it is a parable, it's a parable, and it does have allegory in it, he just goes the extra mile. And he's talking about things that have nothing to do with the text. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's really out there. But unfortunately, you know, the allegorical method hasn't died. It's still with us. And we do see it in, say, certain cult groups, like Valley of the Healing uses it. It's very strange. Very strange. It has nothing to do with history or context. It's just sort of extracting it. We see it in ancient Gnosticism. Like, for example, the Valentinians used it. Many Gnostic cults use this method. So you do find a lot of strange methods out there. You find, say, you still find some Docetist readings, Docetist hermeneutics, where everything is spiritualized. Absolutely everything in the text is spiritualized without any mooring again in history or in archaeology. So, for example, a Docetist reading would say, read the, say, the incarnation as Mary is told that she will be the carrier of Christ. And ipso magico presto, there's a fully grown spirit of Jesus because he's never really a body. He doesn't have a body. So he's a grown spirit standing right beside the Virgin Mary after she's given the Annunciation. So, and she's really surprised. She thought she was going to be pregnant, and here's this ghost. So you do get these Docetist readings as well. Joseph's relieved, but Mary is surprised. So yes, absolutely. There's some issues there with but some interesting readings nonetheless, and some really like some of the Gnostic readings. Like really, there's some really strange Gnostic ones, like the Gospel of Bartholomew, where Jesus resurrects from the tomb and starts yelling at 7 demons. It's just crazy stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very interesting question. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff out there. M. Sharif 124 for $5. Thank you very much for your generosity tonight. It's been really helpful. I really appreciate all you've done tonight. It's going to help our ministry tremendously. So thank you very much. How are archaeologists able to pin down the date of a destruction layer to a specific decade? How certain are these conclusions? Well, it does. How certain will depend on the site. And sometimes they can be really precise. Sometimes they can be less precise. So it depends. Now, there's it usually is because with a destruction layer, anything that is found in that destruction layer can be dated to the time of the destruction. Okay? And what they find in these destruction layers are potsherds, so pottery. And pottery is definitely datable. Some pottery is more datable than other. Like, for example, Mycenaean ware. Very datable. It's very easy to identify and to trace down to certain decades. So Mycenaean, like, for example, three ware is easily datable from, I think it was something like 1250 BC to 1190. That's the range. But oh, okay. All right. So what we have here is sometimes you'll find scarabs. Now, scarabs are the best. Scarabs are awesome because and you often find these when there's an Egyptian invasion. With a scarab, soldiers used to carry scarabs on their person as sort of amulets, because soldiers believed that they carried with them the power of the king in these little scarab amulets. And they would drop them when they did a conquest, and then you had the destruction layer, and then those would be found within the layer. What's so great about a scarab is it can be often dated to the reign of a specific king because they have the name of the king on it. It can also be dated because sometimes the name of the king would be changed over time in very subtle or small ways. So you might have 2 scarabs, one with one writing, one with another writing, and that can tell you, even down to sometimes the decade, when certain things happened. Like, for example, if we find, let's say, just take the example, the name of King Tut. His original throne name was Tutankhaten, or Aten. Tutankhaten. So we know from that that reign, that begins in the first 3 years of King Tut's reign. So if we find that particular name, we know that that is before King Tut leaves Amarna to set up his new capital at Thebes, or the old capital, resume the old capital at Thebes. Because after that, after he returns to Thebes, he changes his name to Tutankhamun. So, basically, living is the image of Amun versus living is the image of Aten. So in that case, it's really, really clear. And since King Tut only reigned 10 years, we know the first scarab is from the 3-year period and the second scarab is from the 7-year period. So if you have a scarab, it can be really, really helpful to date certain things. So you got this combination of pottery fragments, material culture items. So, even certain, sculptures of deities and decoration styles can all be dated and have typologies that are associated with them. So, and if you've got more than one piece of evidence, for example, if you have for example, a piece of Mycenaean 3-ware plus a scarab, even better. I mean, this is why we can date certain things to certain times, because we find these highly datable artifacts there. So we can't be exact on the date. We can't pin it down usually to a year. Often we can. Like, for example, the conquest of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, we can date that down to almost within a 2-year period. Just because the records of Nebuchadnezzar are so good. And that is easily datable. So it really does depend upon what exactly we're talking about by way of the evidence here. But sometimes it's exact, sometimes it isn't. But it can often be narrowed down to a matter of decades. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, we're after 10 already. We still got some super chats here. Well, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take the rest of the super chats. Okay. Okay. Do you know where that is? Okay. All right, Swift C. This is going to be the last non-super chat we'll take for the night, by the way, because we got actually so many super chats still to answer. But, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I should answer Swift C's question here. I mean, he got me in trouble last time. Just joking with you, man. Just joking. Just joking. Okay. Question: how is young love viewed upon in the ancient Near East and in ancient Israel? Was it similar to modern dating in any way? No, it wasn't. There was a concept of young love. We do know that there was a concept of young love. We do find this in say Hellenistic poetry. So there is a concept of young love. But the other factor is that a lot of marriages were arranged. And in the case of young love, it's usually in the concept of people didn't date. There was no dating back then. It was generally marriages were done for essentially cementing family ties and relationships. Okay. So even among say lower classes, what you would have is people who would and all these marriages were arranged. Now we do have some records of say attempts at young love that didn't go so well. we don't quite, well, the Romeo and Juliet saga actually comes from, it's actually, believe it or not, a parody of a young love tragedy. It's a parody. Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare got the inspiration of Romeo and Juliet from a play by Ovid, Ovid, where Ovid lampoons a young love tragedy. He's doing a lampooning. Ovid is hysterically funny. I mean, he's a great poet. He's brilliant, and he's actually one of my favorite of the Hellenistic poets because it's so funny the way he lampoons things. But that's where Shakespeare gets his idea for Romeo and Juliet from. He gets it from Ovid. But we do have some other ancient Near Eastern love things that are just not quite so. I think there's actually one. I believe it is a Mesopotamian text. Don't quote me on this. It's been a long time since I looked it up. Where a young guy falls in love with a young woman, goes to her father to try to convince him to marry. Well, the father has already picked out done a prearranged marriage. He's created a contract with another man to marry off the daughter. So basically, the young man brings 7 of his buddies to try to convince the father to change his mind. Well, the father kills all the friends and the young lover and throws him in the river. It's just so young love didn't always go so well in the ancient Near East. The problem solved. So we do find that there is concepts of young love, but it's often seen as impractical. It's often seen as unrealistic. It often is portrayed as unwise. So there isn't dating like we would have in the modern world. That's not a concept back then. But there is basically the sort of the more optimistic side of young love is you got married through an arranged marriage, you lucked out and your spouse is roughly your age. And frankly, it wasn't always a older man, younger woman situation either. You know, you do get lots of arranged marriages of a really old man and a really young woman. You get that situation because old man, he's rich, lots of money, and that was really important back then. But you do get the opposite that happens too, where 2 families want to cement a relationship, and it's an older woman, and a young man. That happened too, because political alliances were and financial alliances were more important than the happiness of a couple. So that's sort of the overview of what happened here. Ironically enough, Shakespeare also is said to have married an older woman. So, you know, I don't know how much he was following what happened in the ancient Near East, but you know, there is definitely some precedent that he had some insight into what was going on through, say, more Greek literature that he was exposed to. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope you do well on your paper. Let me know how it goes. All right, let's get back to the super chats, and that was the last non-super chat for the night. We leave off. I think we left off at Vic. Vic M for $20 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you plan on updating groundhog chronology in the near future with newly discovered synchronisms? And do you also plan to incorporate images and translations of the text showing the synchronisms? Okay, that's 2 questions. And I would love the opportunity to upgrade Groundhog. Right now, it's really server confined. It is really, I'd love to get, say, the eponym list in there. I want the eponym list in there. I think that would be very, very valuable to have the eponym list in there. It's not in there. It needs to be in there. I does need some more synchronisms. I would love to. I just don't have the time to. It does need an overall code review and an improvement to the code. So there's a lot of things that need to be done to it, and I really wish I had the time to do this because, again, it has answered so many questions on chronology that I think it would almost be, in some respects, it's a program a little before its time. It was a program that was done before people even recognized the need for computational processing in chronology. Now there's now researchers that are starting to do this work, but they still haven't caught up to where we are with even Groundhog. So I think it's a crying shame that I'm not a fully funded chair somewhere that can devote his time to doing research like this. But, I have to live with the life situation I've got. So, yes, I'd love to be able to just quit my day job and devote myself to pure research, but I can't. And unfortunately, Groundhog has to take a backseat until some magic benefactor swoops in and says, here's a research millionaire ship to essentially do research the rest of your natural life. So I'm not holding my breath, but I would love to give this a thorough do over, as it were, because I think it does valuable things and it needs to happen. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And it's a great question too. Smoky Saint. Okay, for $5. Good to see you, friend. And thank you for the super chat. God bless you, Dr. Falk. Thank you for highlighting dishonesty in some scholarship. It is much needed. Well, it was necessary. It was necessary. And the way we did it was also necessary. We didn't take our decisions to do this lightly. I had actually hoped not to respond to him. But, we had enough people sort of demand that were confused by it and needed help. They needed help understanding where we're coming from, what we thought about the criticisms, and we also needed to take away the fear aspect. This is why we did use the clown metaphor. We use the clown metaphor because a lot of people are afraid of Kip. They're very afraid of him. They're afraid of his intellect. And we needed something visual to take away that fear, to expose it for what it is. So we don't take this lightly. We took it very, very seriously, and we did it very prayerfully when we did it. So I'm glad it blessed. I'm glad it enlightened. And as I said, we didn't do it. We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it a. We're not going to make it an ongoing thing. But it was necessary in this case to respond. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Again, love your show, man. I have to admit I often listen to it at work. It does help the day pass, even though it does shoot up my data rates through the roof. But I do really enjoy your show. You call a spade, and I really respect that. It does need to happen more. It does need to happen more. And we have to forego the cult of nice. We're giving people a free pass because they're nice, they're inoffensive. While they completely corrode away the foundations of our faith. So, we don't take a lot of stands on this channel about religion, but we do take a stand concerning Christianity itself. So for us, that's important, is that, that we represent Christianity in its truest biblical sense. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And it's really, really good to see you here tonight. Hey. Tom Wanchek for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you seen William Lane Craig's recent criticism of John Walton's views, mainly in Craig's recent book on the historical Adam? Seemed forceful. Okay. I have not seen William Lane Craig's recent criticism of Walton's views. I generally side with Walton's views. So, in fact, I side generally more with Walton than I do on, say, Heiser, even though I have a lot of agreement with Heiser. On those little fine details, I tend to side more with Walton. I think William Lane Craig is out of his wheelhouse here. I think he doesn't understand the ancient Near Eastern context enough to really to talk about this intelligently. But he is a big name, and that's why he gets published on talking about the historical Adam. Is because he's a big name apologist, and many people will buy his book. And that's what the publishers care about. Publishers care about really how many books you're going to sell. That's what they care about. They don't care about the content as much. As long as you make a half-coherent argument and can sell lots of books, you can get published very easily. So as I say, I haven't read his book, I haven't reviewed his book, so I can't say what his criticism of Walton are. But I'm automatically a little skeptical here, because I know Walton does really, really good work here in this particular arena. So, again, that's my opinion on it, as far as I know, and I don't know that much. So, at least on this subject. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Slam RN, good to see you. How are you doing? What? Oh, you're home for the night. Oh, wow, awesome. Cool. So I'm glad you're home. So for $20, thank you very much for the super chat. Keep up the good work. The channel fills an important niche. Thank you. Well, you're most welcome. It's our pleasure. When we started this channel, we were thinking, okay, we're going to be focus on ancient Egypt and the Bible. That was our we've been doing the same thing pretty much since day one. We thought to myself, okay, this is going to be a tiny niche. Who's gonna? I mean, I really thought when we first started this channel, we would have like five subscribers and never achieve. We figured we might get monetization. That's 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of viewing by the time we hit year 9. But we thought that was okay. We were really, really okay with that, because we were going to do a ministry. This was going to be a ministry, something that met the needs of people. So we understood at the beginning, out on the outset, how niche we were, and we understood that we weren't going to be a general commentary channel. We weren't going to be an entertainment channel. We're not going to be a broad biblical issues channel. We're not going to do interviews. We're not going to do a lot of these things that a lot of channels do to become, great, large 100K channels. We got that. We sort of understood that. We were going to do what we were good at. We're going to focus on one sort of area, which is sort of that overlap between ancient Egypt and the Bible. Now, we do some ancient Egypt, and we do some just pure Bible too, and we do some other ancient Near Eastern stuff as well. But it's all sort of in that sort of niche. And it was a niche nobody had done. Nobody was doing this niche. So, so we are very, very pleased by the reception we've gotten. And at the beginning, it was kind of rough. People were hard on us. They were saying, well, you should be broader in apologetics. You should be nicer. You should be. Got a lot of, you should be nicer. But we also know too that that what we did had to fill that niche. Had to be straight talk. We do straight talk on this channel because if we sort of couched it in a lot of waffle words and probablys and ifs and academic jargonese, that we're going to lose people. Because people, especially your average viewer, doesn't have a high tolerance for that kind of language. They sort of start tuning out when you start having too many waffle words. So, we chose carefully both our content and our style. And as I said, most of the comments, negative comments that we've received have been basically low content objections regarding our style. And that's okay. If that's not for you, it's not for you. And we're totally okay if they go to other channels that are more agreeable to them. Totally okay. But we also think that this for us is a matter of integrity too. It's integrity that we represent. We are as we are off screen as we are on screen. You know, we're not putting on an act like here. You know, I behave this way at home. Okay. My wife's laughing right now. You're getting the real me. You're getting me as you would find me in a coffee shop, as you would find me in my home. I mean, you're seeing more of my home than I probably want, which is the guitar in the back and the painting and our Japanese dishes and all that. But yeah, we are who we are, and this channel is what it is, and we don't make any apologies for that. And we appreciate that this is meeting people's needs, and that for us is what is most important. It's fulfilling a need, and if it fulfills a need, there's a reason for us to be here. So anyway, thank you very much for that generous super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm so glad you are here with us tonight. It's just a blessing to have you here. Okay. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think that the use of the title Pharaoh by Merneptah was influenced or connected to the Israelites' Exodus? No. It is very, very true that during, say, well, let's back up a bit. The title Pharaoh begins actually during the reign of Thutmose III / Queen Hatshepsut. During that period. That's the time when the term Pharaoh becomes a title, meaning great house. As in House of David, House of Omri, etc. So it is just sort of a term that means the great house. Now, the use of the term Pharaoh as a substitute for the name of the king is something we find in Dynasty 18 and 19. And we find this in Egyptian documents as well. And it does predate Merneptah and Ramses II. So, you know, already, you say, during the reign of Thutmose IV and earlier, we do find that the king is just referred to as Pharaoh. We see this in some of the documents of Amenhotep III. So, you know, this use is not actually connected to the Israelites or the Exodus. It's something that existed in Egyptian culture going back to Dynasty 18. Going back to Dynasty 18 and into Dynasty 19 and through to Dynasty 20. So this is just something that's just a normal aspect of Egyptian parlance, that you could substitute the name of the king with just the title Pharaoh. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. $10 super chat from Leo GM. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Your contributions do help us continue with the channel, so very, very much appreciated. Okay. If I'm going through a little faster now, understand it's because it's 10:30. We're already half an hour past our normal time here. So I want to make sure I get through all the super chats here before calling it a night. So if we do go a little faster, forgive me. Catafact3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did Middle Kingdom ideas of the afterlife shape Judeo-Christians on the afterlife as opposed by Toby Wilkinson? I don't think so. The Egyptians had a concept of the afterlife that goes way back. Every ancient Near Eastern culture had a concept of the afterlife. I think Toby Wilkinson's analysis here is a little bit of a stretch. I think Toby Wilkinson's done some good work, but I also think that there's a little bit of a stretch that the Middle Kingdom ideas had any sort of influence by the time of, say, the 1st century. By the time of the 1st century, you already had sort of a potpourri of ideas in the culture already. So, you know, maybe tangentially, that the idea, really the idea I think he's driving at here is the Osiris resurrection. It played a part in those ideas. The problem is the Osiris resurrection isn't really a resurrection. It's really sort of a reanimation, some sex with a corpse, followed by a resurrection into the afterlife. So it's not really any sort of resurrection in the way that say the Osiris myth was. So there is some real issues there, and I think that it's a stretch to try to compare ideas of say resurrection and the afterlife that we find in say Middle Kingdom Osiris myth to Jesus Christ or the early. It's not different. It's totally different. Totally different. They're apples and oranges. But here's, I think, an example where a historic parallel is sort of overread, and that does happen. You know, there are cultural parallels that do correspond to certain aspects, but there's also cultural parallels that are unrelated and don't correspond well, but they're sort of forced into that parallel position. To talk about bring up an earlier super chat, I think, frankly, the story of Jonah is much more applicable to the Judeo-Christian idea of, say, resurrection than, say, the Osiris myth. That makes a lot more sense to me. And I think that has to be where we go sort of get those ideas from as far as, say, the Judeo-Christian approach to the afterlife, to heaven, to hell, etc. Yeah, Jesus raising his friend from the dead, the Lazarus. Much more akin to Lazarus. Much more akin to Lazarus, much more akin to Jonah. Much more akin to the prophet who escapes my memory right now, who laid on the corpse and 3 days later, or several days later, I think it was, rises from the dead. I forget who. I think it was Elijah. But I can't remember the prophet's name per se. But, you know, we do have those in the Old Testament too. So why go as far as Abydos, Egypt, when you can just go to what's already in the culture in Jerusalem? That makes more sense. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And thank you for the question. Okay. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I came here after watching you on the other Paul's channel. Well, thank you very much. Welcome aboard. Thank you for making very good videos. Well, you're most welcome. It's for the glory of God. For the glory of God and for the edification of our viewers. So you're the reason why we do this work. And you're the reason why we kind of keep doing this work. I mean, it's very discouraging work. We are blessed. We are very, very blessed by a great subscriber base. You know, I sometimes quip that that my subscriber base is more intelligent, better read, and more handsome than other subscriber bases. And there's some truth. There is some. It's well, no offense to the ladies, as my wife just pointed out, but there is some truth to this. We have gone out of our way to cultivate a subscriber base that is well-read, is intelligent, who thinks for themselves. And that's really important to us. We're building a community here. We want to build a community of people who know their scriptures, who read widely, who are versed in the scholarship, even if they don't agree with it. We want people who are equipped for service, who aren't ashamed because they don't know their Bibles, who don't know the scholarship, who don't know the evidence. We're building a community here, and people like you are part of that community. So, you know, you guys, you subscribers are a rowdy bunch, but we couldn't do it without you, and we're glad every one of you is here because You form a community. You guys are intelligent, well-read, and very good-looking. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Biblical Brainstorm for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Great name. Okay. In Hebrew, there are singular, plural, and dual forms of the words. Yes. One example of the dual is Shemayim, heavens. Any reason for it? Why it is only in the dual? Two-tiered cosmology, maybe? To clarify the point of the super chat, I'm not asking why the word is itself only one form like the dual, but speculating why the word for heaven is in the dual form as opposed to singular or plural. Nobody really knows why, as far as I can tell. I would have to do some more reading for this because I haven't actually looked at it. It is in the dual, and there does seem to be multiple heavens. Now, we don't exactly, again, know why it's in the dual. We have some guesses. There's the idea that there's, say, the cosmic heavens of, say, the sky and the cosmos, and then the spiritual heaven. That's one explanation I've heard for this. But, I mean, that's sort of speculation as to why it's in the dual. So we're not exactly sure why. It's very speculative. For example, the Apostle Paul will talk about the third heaven, being the spiritual heaven. Now, why is it dual in the Hebrew and then becomes plural in the Greek? And talked about it in triplicate. There is some idea that in the triplicate, it's talking about the ultimate heaven. So we don't exactly know. There does seem to be some idea of, say, for example, in, say, Hebrew cosmology, where you've got a heaven, then a celestial ocean, and then a heaven above that. So again, we're talking analogical language again when it talks about, say, the cosmology of the Hebrew Bible. So there is a lot of speculation here. We have to admit there's a lot of speculation. We don't exactly know why. I think there was some work on this recently done, but I remember reading an article on this, but the sort of the details escape me at the moment. So that's really all I can say about this without, as again, further reading and further analyzing of it. But anyway, it's a great question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Maurice SWE for 100 Swedish krona. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here, friend. Glad you made it tonight. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you believe there are portions of the Book of Enoch that were originally written by Enoch, considering Jude refers to him as the seventh Adam when quoting Enoch? Okay. No. I don't believe that there are portions of Enoch that were originally written by Enoch. Enoch was a pre-flood patriarch. We don't have any extant writings pre, to put it simply. So, Enoch is clearly Second Temple literature. I think this is definitely a book that was written, say, after the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem during Ezra's and Nehemiah's time. It does sort of reflect the mythology of its age, which is definitely Iron Age, later Iron Age. So, now with that said, I do think it's a very influential book. It's very, very influential on Second Temple period Judaism. Book of Enoch is incredibly influential on Second Temple. It's even influential in the New Testament. Very influential. It's not scripture. It's not canon. It's a pseudepigraphal book. So it's not even apocryphal. It's a pseudepigraphal. So, because it cannot be written by Enoch. So, we have to sort of take it, even though it is influential, we do have to take it on the basis of it being pseudepigrapha. And pseudepigrapha is, say, extra biblical writings that have a false author. And we do get a bunch of these. There are a bunch of Second Temple period books that break down. I mean, the breakdown is kind of like you got your biblical texts, you got your apocryphal texts, you got your pseudepigraphal texts, and then you got your non-biblical texts. And the Book of Enoch firmly fits into that pseudepigraphal sort of category. So it's definitely something that's quoted by the New Testament. It's something that's quoted in Second Temple period literature. Very, very, very influential of that period of literature, but it also does not refer to the real Enoch. So as much as it'd be lovely to have writings of the real Enoch, we don't have them. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm glad you made it. So great to see you here. And thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And that is our last super chat for the night. So we are going to call it a night now because I am exhausted. We went 40 minutes over than we normally do. We normally only go for at most 2 hours. 2 hours and 40 minutes tonight, and I am tired. So I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. I want to thank all our super chatters, and of course, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Our Patreon supporters for really help us make. They essentially pay for all our equipment and upgrades and internet and all that stuff. So Patreon support is very, very helpful to us, and your super chats also just help us incredibly financially. We couldn't keep doing this without the super chats. So anyway, we're going to call it a night here. I want to thank all our subscribers who watch our material, because that's helpful too. Because the more you watch and the more you interact with our videos, the more YouTube promotes them. That's one of the things is you leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos, YouTube says, somebody is interested in this video. And when YouTube see someone's interested in the video, leave a like, share the URL. More people will watch it, more people will see it, and more people will subscribe. And that sort of leads to this loop of, basically, people interacting with the content and getting wider distribution. So I want to thank all our subscribers. You guys go a long ways, and you help us really every time you view our videos and you comment on them and you like them. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It was wonderful to have you there. Great set of questions. Wow, the questions were amazing tonight. And we so much appreciate really interesting questions. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Have a good night.